Let's get down to business. Greetings, my name is Lena, and I am a typical 26-year-old woman who works in the field of mathematics. Even while it's not exactly the stuff of fairy tales, it's enough to pay the bills. Reed is a man who has been able to maintain his mental stability while working as a college professor. I am married to another man named Reed. He is 30 years old, which is 4 years older than I am. But who's counting? We don't have to worry about the drama that is going on in the world because we have this quaint little setting. Or so I had believed. Vivian, Reed's mother, appeared before him like a storm dressed up as a Sunday morning. She made it quite apparent from the very beginning that I was about as welcome as a tax audit. The very first time I met her, she examined me in such a way that it seemed as though I had just emerged from a cheap container. She spoke the words, "So, you're the accountant," in a tone that was dripping with something chilled. My response was, "Yes, ma'am," and I was attempting to preserve my composure. She mumbled, "Interesting," as she turned her attention to Reed. "I always thought you'd end up with someone more," as if it were a horrible perfume, that more lingered in the air. Not fancy enough, that's what I understood she meant. My parents are just normal people who put forth a lot of effort. They are not exactly newsworthy. On the other hand, Vivian, I supposed she was hoping that her son would be able to obtain a princess. As I stood there, I was Cinderella, but I was missing the fairy godmother. God bless Reed, he either decided not to notice it or did not see it. On the other hand, he would dismiss it by saying, "Mom is just old-fashioned." Vivian's barbs, however, became more pointed with each visit and each supper with the family. "Do you remember Kara, your former girlfriend? Wasn't she a lawyer, was she? It's a terrible thing that the two of you fell out." I made an effort to laugh it off and concentrate on the positive aspects, such as the fact that Reed and I were creating our own little universe. Having a secure job, a home, and making plans for the future together are all important. On the other hand, the words spoken by Vivian, man, they cling to you like gum on your shoe. At some point, we find ourselves having supper at their residence. When it comes to applauding Reed's achievements and how he is a shining beacon for the family, Vivian is going all out. After that, she turns to me with a smile that has the potential to freeze the entire world. As for Lena, I notice that she is still experimenting with numbers. It's very charming. At long last, Reed spoke out and said, "Mom, come on, Lena is doing exceptionally well at her job." Nevertheless, Vivian just waved him off. "Indeed, without a doubt, yes. I suppose that we should all do what we are able to accomplish." You were the only person in the world who did not understand the joke, and it was like living in a comedy. Reed incessantly advised me to disregard her, stating that it was irrelevant to me because of her opinion. The statement was simple for him to make because he was not the one who received the verbal side-eye each time we crossed the door. At that point, I began to dread such visits. It was like stepping into a minefield while blindfolded for the intensity and the backhanded compliments that were being given. I, on the other hand, swallowed it up for Reed. It's interesting how love can make you do absurd things, like put up with a lady who wishes you were someone else instead of who you are. So, that's the scoop. Lena, the bride who, according to the queen bee herself, cannot be considered appropriate. Living the dream one snide comment at a time is the way to go. However, hey, at least it's our dream, isn't that one? And there was no way that my mother-in-law, who was a powerful figure, could take it away from me without putting up a battle. Nevertheless, life has its own unique way of delivering curveballs, and the one that I received was in the form of a peanut. You read it correctly, it is a peanut that is so small that it is invisible. For me, eating them is like playing Russian roulette. even though the majority of people don't give it a second thought before doing so. It was when I was only a youngster that I learned this lesson the hard way. A tablespoon of peanut butter turned into an emergency trip to the emergency room. The question, what's in the food, has been a never-ending game in my life ever since that time. This is nothing new for Reed. While I was in restaurants, he witnessed me pulling out my allergy card and questioning the wait staff as if I were investigating a crime. There are peanuts in here, right? What about contamination from other sources? Some people get it, while others look at me as if I were a diva who was making a big deal out of nothing. Afterwards, there is Vivian. During the initial conversation we had about my allergies, her eyes were dangerously close to falling out of her head. Despite the fact that I had just told her that I was allergic to breathing, she sneered and said, "You're allergic to peanuts. In addition, there is soy, peas, and what else? Is it air?" He leaped in, and may God bless him. "This is quite serious, Mom. It's possible that Lena will land in the hospital." It was dismissed by Vivian. "Oh, if you please. On a daily basis, people consume peanuts. You have it all in your brain." I was about to respond, but Reed gently gripped my hand beneath the table, almost as if he was pleading with me to let go of it. I didn't give it much thought since I believed it was an isolated incident. Nevertheless, Vivian was required to put up a performance each and every time. The dinner turned into a gamble. Everywhere she went, she would flaunt her dishes, bragging about how she had made everything safe for Lena. On the other hand, her voice always had a certain edge to it, giving the impression that she was joking about with me and playing along with my little problem. She once presented this elegant dish while beaming with pride and a smile on her face. "Produced it on my own. There will be no peanuts whatsoever," she said. I had a cautious attitude. "Do you have any doubts, Vivian? There is no denying the severity of my allergies." Her eyes were rolled back. "Of course, I have no doubt. What kind of a monstrous creature do you consider me to be?" It was at that moment that I made a decision that would change my life forever. I went ahead and took a small mouthful, and then, all of a sudden, I was filled with regret. I started experiencing itching in my throat, and my skin became red and swollen. In an instant, Reed was on his feet, and his face was covered in a look of apparent fear. What is Vivian's response? "Oh my goodness, it must have been something else. Your behavior is usually so theatrical." Spectacular. While I was searching for my EpiPen in a frenzied manner, I had the sensation that my throat was shutting up. Reed was enraged by him. "Mom, this is completely serious. Take a look at her." However, Vivian did nothing except stand there, her expression a combination of amazement and obstinate denial. Following that occurrence, Reed and I established the rules of the game. Unless Vivian is able to take my allergies seriously, I will not be eating at her restaurant again. There was a whole lot going on, with Reed having a disagreement with his mother, me feeling like a burden, and everything else. The clincher, however, is that, in spite of this, Vivian continued to behave as if I was making everything up, as if my allergies were some kind of personal assault on her cuisine or something. One day, I overheard her saying, "Reed, it's always something with Lena," and I decided to listen in. "I am unable to consume either of these foods. How are you able to have such a life?" Reed, who is known for his ability to maintain harmony, made an attempt to explain that my allergies were quite genuine and that there was no way to avoid them. On the other hand, Vivian, simply put, she did not wish to listen to it. That individual is as obstinate as a mule. In other words, peanuts. I had no idea that something so insignificant could provoke such a significant uproar. On the other hand, here I am, hanging on by a thread, one bite at a time. Is that Vivian? Still, she is under the impression that I am simply being tough. However, just think about it. What would life be without a little bit of drama around the dinner table? All of Vivian's trips to our home grew more regular than a poor rerun of a comedy, and each one of them included its own unique collection of insults and remarking. It was almost as if she had a list of things she could do to make me feel insignificant, and she was going through each item on the list one by one. I was in the middle of my weekend leisure mood when she unexpectedly stopped by one afternoon. She was wearing sweatpants, no makeup, and the house was already in a well-lived-in state. Her style was to drop by without prior notice. She groaned and stepped over a pile of magazines that I hadn't gotten around to tidying up yet. "Oh, Lena," she said. "I see we're still embracing the casual approach to housekeeping." I suppressed a response out of my mouth while mentally counting to 10. "Having a wonderful time on my day off, Vivian. Do you want some coffee?" Despite the fact that her nose was wrinkled as if she had just stepped into a garbage, she declined the offer. "I'm at a loss. It's really unlikely that you have something that hasn't used up yet." It was more out of spite than anything else that I was boiling water, but I couldn't help but feel the sting as I did so. You know, not everyone measures their worth by how clean their countertops are. Vivian sat in the living room with a look of disgust on her face. "That has nothing to do with value, Lena. Having pride in your property is the essential component. But let's not pretend that you would comprehend that, should we?" What really took my goat was when she began in on more personal issues, which is something you don't simply toss about in casual conversation. The jabs were getting old, but what really got my goat was with her. The tone of her voice was tinged with something that I couldn't quite pinpoint, whether it was concern or uncertainty. "You know, Reed told me that you two were trying for a baby," she continued. "I just hope, for your sake, it doesn't inherit your propensity for health issues." There was a close call with the kettle. "Excuse me." Vivian shrugged, demonstrating her mastery of a semblance of innocence. "To put it simply, it is a miracle that you are able to operate at all, considering your allergies and other conditions. These days, it is impossible to be too careful." The implication was very plain, and it struck like a blow to the gut. It was a mixture of fury and pain that caused my hands to shake. "My allergies have nothing to do with my ability to have a healthy child, Vivian." "Oh, sweetheart, of course they do," she said. "But there's no need to be concerned," she said as she caressed my arm with a chill that might ice hell. "I'm sure there's still hope for you." I was fuming, and every ounce of my being yearned to strike out, to reprimand her, to protect myself and my future children from her irrational judgments. I was seeing things. Nevertheless, before I could come up with an answer, Reed entered the room displaying the epitome of heedless happiness. "Hey, how are you doing? Hey, Mom and Lena, how are things doing here?" As the Ice Queen began to melt into a semblance of warmth, Vivian underwent a transformation. "Just having a little chat with Lena, you know, girl talk." I stared at Reed, my eyes begging him to see through the deception, but as is his custom, he failed to recognize the quiet signs that I was giving him. "That is very cool. Have you decided to remain for supper, Mom?" The remainder of the visit was a haze of forced civility and biting my tongue as I tried to save my dignity. Immediately following Vivian's departure, I went to Reed, my anger and hurt beginning to bubble over. "Are you oblivious to the things that she is saying to me? What about us?" Reed sighed, ever the one to bring about calm. "You are aware of how she behaves, Lena. Is it okay if you just let things go? Not worth the anguish that it causes. Not worth the stress." Incredulous, I repeated what you said. The implication that she is making is that it would be better for our kid to not be born. To what extent does that not warrant arousing one's anger? The only thing he had to say was the same old stale spiel about forgetting and moving on. He did not say anything. But certain things, certain phrases that remain in your mind and continue to reverberate long after they have been uttered. Also, can you forget? It is not as simple as it may sound. When you least expect it, life has a strange way of throwing you for a loop. This is something that happens very frequently. There are other instances when it is not a curveball, but rather a surprise that is so great that it knocks the wind out of you, and most of the time, it is in a positive way. The news came to me on a Tuesday. At that moment, the sun was doing that thing where it was not quite ready to set, but you could see that it was having some thoughts about it. You know, I have been feeling a little weird for a while now, but it wasn't anything severe. It was just off enough that I decided to get one of those tests from the drugstore, just to have a second opinion. So there I was, in the toilet of our home, gazing at this small stick that had the audacity to completely transform my life in the period of 3 minutes. Not negative. I glanced once again after blinking. Not a negative note. My voice reverberated off the tiles to say, "Read," and it was a mixture of terror and something I couldn't quite put my finger on. In an instant, he was there, the lines of stress that had already begun to appear on his forehead becoming in full view. "What's going on? Is everything all right?" It was with a shaky hand that I handed him the test. "Does this look positive to you?" Before his eyes met mine, he took it while peering at the little window. His eyes then jumped up to meet mine. "Holy, is this?" "Yeah," I managed to say, a chuckle bursting forth from some inaccessible part of my being. "I think we're having a baby," until Reed threw his arms around me in an embrace that was so tight that I thought I would burst. The stillness that followed was heavy and loaded with 1,000 things that were left unsaid. "This is very incredible, Em. Both of us are going to become parents." Parents. Upon my tongue, the word appeared strange. It was too large for me to completely comprehend at this point in time. However, shortly after that, the truth of our circumstance began to sink in, and the shadow of Vivian's words began to linger in the back of my mind. What kind of response would she have to this information? The question is whether she would consider it a miracle or merely another thing to criticize. My concerns were communicated to Reed while he was still around me with his arms. "Where is your mother, exactly? You are aware of what she has been expressing." Taking a step back, he looked me in the eyes and then drew away. "Is it acceptable if I forget about my mother? Specifically, this pertains to our family. We will deal with her when it is necessary to do so." Although it was easier to say than to achieve at that very moment, when the sun was sinking and giving a warm warmth about us, it seemed like it was conceivable. Together, we were in this situation. Reed requested that we phone his parents to tell them the news once the initial shock and excitement had subsided a little bit. At the mere notion of it, I had a tightening in my gut. The wild card that I wasn't sure I was prepared to cope with was Vivian's response before the game began. Nevertheless, being able to conceal it was not an option, and a portion of me wished for the best. In the beginning, we had Cyrus, Reed's father. Following the second ring, he picked up, and Reed did not waste any time in doing so. "Dear Dad, I have some news for you. Lena is expecting a child." Even though we were talking on the phone, Cyrus's voice was filled with an infectious energy. "That is just great. You are very welcome. In the future, I will be a grandfather." My heart was calmed by his genuine delight, which was a welcome relief. We would be grateful if we could collect his response in a bottle and give it to Vivian. When we talk about the devil, the next person to speak was her. The call was transferred to the speaker, and after the customary greetings, Reed revealed the shocking information. There was a silence, a lengthy one, during which Vivian could almost be heard analyzing the information that had been presented. In the end, she began to speak, although her voice was not as crisp as it normally is. "I must say, this comes as a surprise. We have to raise a glass. A family get-together is going to be organized by me in a couple of weeks. Encourage everyone to take part in the happiness." It was her remarks that took me by surprise. Would this be the same Vivian who analyzed each and every one of my actions, who had any doubts about our future felicity? Despite this, Reed did not miss a single beat. "Mom, it is sounding wonderful. We will be present." Without anyone being able to see it, I gave a little nod of assent. What other options do I have? Even though I had some misgivings, I believe that this was an attempt to make peace, or a thorn bush that has been well concealed. However, only time would tell. As we hung up, Reed was grinning, caught up in the thrill of becoming a father and maybe, foolishly, the expectation that his mother's reaction indicated a change of heart. He did not know that his mother had changed her mind. I took a more careful approach, as the skepticism was a difficult shell to remove. My thoughts was racing as I lay in bed that night, with Reed's regular breathing providing a cadence that was both reassuring and soothing. Where would this get-together of the family take place? If I were to walk into a lion's cave dressed up as a baby shower, would it be a true celebration, or would I be heading into chaos? The abrupt transition that Vivian made from being the ice queen to becoming the pleasant hostess not sat well with me. In spite of this, I was prepared to comply, at least for the time being, since I cared about Reed and the future of our child. My thoughts were filled with a mixture of joy and worry as I contemplated the forthcoming holiday, which was looming big in my mind. What would be waiting for us when we arrived? In point of fact, arriving at Reed's parents' residence was like to walking onto a stage. The evening was scheduled to be a performance, and the audience consisted of members of Reed's family who were prepared to offer their congratulations. There was a striking contrast between the typical frost that I felt from Vivian and the genuine warmth that I received from their well wishes. Tonight, however, she was able to muster a grin that appeared to be less forced than usual, and her congratulations carried with them a trace of something that resembled happiness. Nevertheless, it was Cyrus, Reed's father, who immediately drew my attention. His smiles were short and preoccupied, and his normally cheery disposition was replaced by a shadow of worry. These changes occurred when we were all gathered around the table, which was piled with more dishes than a Thanksgiving feast. I decided to play it safe and stick to the items that I knew were safe for me to eat because I had a long list of food allergies. It was at that moment that Vivian made a gesture toward a delicious pie, which was a move that seemed completely unexpected. She emphasized, "Lena, I made sure that this was something that you could enjoy, special, just for you," with a hint of desire in her voice that I was unable to fully trust. I grabbed for a slice of pizza with trepidation, which was more affected by the desire to be at peace than by my hunger. However, before it could even get close to touching my plate, Cyrus's hand appeared out of nowhere and slammed the plate, complete with the pie, to the ground. Vivian's face was completely devoid of color, and her horror was a reflection of our own. The room fell into a startled quiet, and every eye was drawn to us. Reed turned to his father at the very time that the plate hit the floor, breaking the silence like a glass that had been dropped in a room that was otherwise calm. Reed's voice was tight with surprise and fury. "Dad, what is the reason? Why would you choose to act in such a manner?" The generally humorous expression on Cyrus's face was replaced with a gravity that appeared out of place. Cyrus stood there, his normally easygoing disposition gone. Everyone in the room was staring at Cyrus, the broken dish, and us with their eyes darting back and forth between the three of them. Cyrus's voice, which is typically kind and inviting, suddenly reverberated around the living room with such force that it caused a number of family to cringe momentarily. He stated, "I can't be a part of this crime," while his eyes were fixed on Vivian, who appeared to have just witnessed a ghost. "You did what?" As Reed spoke, his voice broke, and his words were etched with incredulity. The following words that Cyrus spoke were like a blow to the stomach. "She," he said, pointing directly at Vivian, "selected and prepared dishes comprised of peanuts and other ingredients that Lena is not allowed to consume. She was aware of it. She wished that it would be painful for Lena, and perhaps even enough to cause her to lose the baby." The stillness that ensued was stifling throughout that time. All eyes gradually moved to Vivian, whose face had lost its color and then turned a deep scarlet. She had been caught in the act by her own husband's admission, and everybody was staring at her. The typical rapid comebacks and sharp tongue that Vivian is known for were nowhere to be found, and she appeared to be at a loss for words for the first time. The atmosphere was thick with astonishment, bewilderment, and a mounting sense of fury, and the room had the sensation of being frozen. Even when Vivian's mouth was open and closed, she did not produce any sound. The understanding of her deeds and the ramifications of those actions gradually crept into her consciousness as she glanced from Cyrus to Reed to me. Following the first shock, the rest of the family began to mumble among themselves, and the initial astonishment eventually gave way to a chorus of disapproval and incredulity. Words such as unbelievable and how could she were heard across the room, portraying Vivian as the antagonist in her own family. The weight of the information that Cyrus had divulged was pressing heavily on me as I remained there, unable to move from the location I was standing in. It was difficult to comprehend the idea that Vivian would go to such great measures to get rid of me. She had such a strong hatred for me that she would put my health and the life of my child in danger doing so. Only Reed's voice, which was both astonished and indignant, could be heard breaking the startled quiet that had descended over the room as a result of Cyrus's unexpected disclosure. Reed's voice was directed at his mother. "For what reason do you despise Lena so much, Mom? Whatever it is that she has done to you that has earned you this?" Everything about Vivian's answer might be described as explosive. A venomous tone could be heard in her voice as she yelled, "I can't stand her. Reed, she is not the proper person for you. She is not deserving of being a member of this family because she is unable to provide you with children who are healthy." Reed's face went a shade of crimson that I had never seen before, and his typical patience and tolerance for his mother's antics vanished right in front of my eyes. On the other hand, he yelled back, "That's enough, Mom," with his voice quivering with wrath. "I couldn't believe you would go to such great lengths. For the time being, I do not wish to see you. I was under the impression that I knew you as a mother." As they drove back to their house, the atmosphere was tight, the air dense with words that were not uttered, and the weight of what had just taken place was heavy. As soon as we arrived at our destination, Reed shifted his attention to me, his look gradually changed from one of fury to one of regret. "I'm so sorry, Lena," he said, his voice heaving with the weight of his feelings. "It was my fault that I did not support you sooner. I ought to have realized how poisonous the situation was. To think that my own mother would act in such a manner is beyond my comprehension." In his eyes I could feel the anguish that he was experiencing as a result of the conflict between his love for me and his allegiance to his family. "Reed, you are not to blame for this." My response was, "We could not have known that she would do something like this," and I was attempting to provide some solace despite the fact that my own feelings were all over the place. However, the harm had already been done. Reed's bond with his mother, which had been impenetrable in the past, had been irreparably broken at this point. Vivian had gained a reputation for being a pariah, not just among us but also among our extended family and acquaintances more generally. The actions she took, which were motivated by illogical anger and worries that were not based, had entirely alienated her. In the end, Cyrus discovered that he was unable to continue his relationship with Vivian, despite the fact that he had taken a stand and disclosed the truth at the risk of his own marriage. Despite the fact that the divorce did not occur immediately, it was an inevitable outcome. He could not handle the thought of living with someone who was capable of such a malicious act and who had plotted against their own grandson, who was yet unborn. As the old saying goes, life finds a way to go forward, and whether we are prepared or not, it will take us along for the journey. After the storm had passed, Reed and I found ourselves returning to the routine of our everyday lives, but this time with a fresh appreciation for the rare moments of tranquility and an anticipation for the future, particularly in light of the fact that our child was on the way. As time went on, Cyrus, Reed's father, became something of a regular presence at our home. Being in his company was a soothing experience, and his eagerness to provide a hand around the house, as well as his enthusiasm at the prospect of becoming a grandparent, were contagious. Being in his presence was a pleasant experience, and it gave us the impression that we were constructing a new sort of family unit, one that was founded on mutual respect and understanding rather than obligation and expectation. "We're really doing this, huh?" As Reed would say this, his hands would rest on my stomach and a smile would dance over his lips. "We're going to be parents." "Yeah," I would respond, the realization of everything rolling over me in waves of happiness and apprehensive anticipation. "Yeah," I would say, "we're going to be great. You'll see." Regarding Vivian, her name is not something that we talk about very often these days. It was still too soon after she had inflicted the damage, and the treachery was still too sudden. However, rumors of her new life would periodically make their way to us through the grapevine. She was living in a modest apartment that she rented, and she had returned to the workforce after a period of working for several decades. The opulent existence that she had formerly governed with such authority was a long cry from what she was enjoying now. If I were to say that I felt sorry for her, I would be lying. When I was younger, I might have been able to empathize with her predicament because it was something that came easy to me. In spite of all, however, compassion was difficult to convince. The decisions that she made, as well as the malicious intent with which she attempted to break our small family apart, just cannot be forgiven. In certain instances, Cyrus would add, "It's a shame, really," while maintaining a detached expression in his eye. She made her bed, though. In response, Reed and I would both say, "Yeah," and then the conversation would swiftly go to more pleasant things. It was hardly a source of happiness to linger on Vivian's fall from grace. The advent of our child and the family that we were constructing together were the primary focal points of our attention at the time, one that is brimming with love and free of the toxicity that had formerly threatened to consume us from the inside out. As Reed's hand found mine, he would tell me, "We've got each other," which was a quiet guarantee of support and solidarity. That's all we really need. Indeed, he was correct. Hope was a continuous companion for us as we continued to wait for the arrival of our kid. Hope for our child's health, hope for our happiness, and hope for a future. When contrasted with the radiance of our fresh start, the shadows of the past were nothing more than shadows. They were dim and unimportant,